Okay, B'ezrat Hashem, today, Masechet Megilla, we're going to learn Yud Aleph Amud Bet, 11b, and we're going to start at the two dots, about a third of the way down the page, Yud Aleph Amud Bet. The art scroll's here, Ali, if you want to. I brought it already, yeah. Yeah, Vakasha. Yeah. Now, today we're going to learn a very interesting sugya, and this is a sugya that focuses on two specific prophecies. Really, that's what we're going to get into over here. We know after, before, but in terms of Churban Bayit Rishon, so there was a prediction by the Nevi'im regarding the time that the Jews would spend in Galut, the first Galut of Bavel, which ultimately was Galut Bavel and Paras Madai. There was a prediction, they predicted. We know it as 70 years. But as we're going to see from this sugya, which is fascinating, it wasn't clear 70 years from what. So meaning you say 70 years, they're going to be in Galut, but 70 years from what? From which event? So as we're going to see, there were three possible points in history that it could have been 70 years from. And there were two prophecies about which event it was referring to. And this created some confusion as to, and we're going to see even the prophets weren't not necessarily so clear. Daniel himself. There was a prophecy of Yirmiyah and there's a prophecy of Daniel, as we'll see in the Psukim as we go through it. This is a fascinating discussion, and really, I guess it underlies the power of the Nevi'im. They were predicting events in the future, like I pick up my coffee in the morning. I mean, this is like an unbelievable thing. So let's get started. Let's see. It's the two dots, about a third of the way down the page. Bayamim Ahem. Everybody see? Bayamim Ahem? See, Eli, you got it? No, you're in the wrong Amud over there. Yud Aleph Amud Bet. Yud Aleph Amud Bet. 11b. Two dots. About a third of the way down the page.
Okay, yeah.
So the pasuk in Megillat Esther, it says that there's a contradiction. On one hand, it says Achashverosh, at the beginning of his malchut, he celebrated, which implies that it was the first year when he became the king. But on the other hand, we have a contradiction because it says it was the third year of his malchut. So in order to answer this question, we're going to say that really what happened was he made the party on the third year of his malchut, and that's when he became settled. That's when he was comfortable, knowing or assuming that the Jews were not going to be redeemed anymore. Because based on his own cheshbon, that was when the exile of the Jews was supposed to come to an end, and it did not come to an end, so therefore he figured they're no longer going to be redeemed. We're going to see what his mistake was, but that was his assumption. So when it says kishevet, when he was settled, it doesn't mean when he started his malchut, but it was rather the third year of his malchut, when he thought by that time, if the Jews haven't been redeemed, they're no longer going to be redeemed. Another interesting thing, by the way, is that the goyim, the non-Jewish kings who ruled over the Jews, also knew the prophecies. They knew what the Nevi'im, Yirmiyah, Daniel, they knew what they had said. It's a very interesting thing. So the pasuk says, "Bayamim ahem kishevet hamelech." The first pasuk says it was when the king was settled, which implies that the party was in the first year. But then it also says right after, it says, Bishnat Shalot lemalko, it was the third year of his reign when he made this party. So which one was it? Was it the first year or the third year? So Rava explains, my kishevet, what does it mean when he was settled? It doesn't mean the first year, but rather it means la'achar shenit yashva da'ato. It means after he felt comfortable, he felt settled. Now, what do you mean he felt settled? Based on a calculation that he understood, he thought that the Jews should have already returned to Eretz Yisrael, rebuilt the Beit HaMikdash, and they haven't. So the fact that they haven't, this made him feel comfortable now to make a party, and as we'll see, he used the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. We know at the party, which was a tremendous zilzul, tremendous disgrace. But this was in the third year based on his calculation. So Amar Achashverosh said the following calculation. Now, we're going to go through this sugya, the different kings that ruled over the Jewish people during this whole era of the Babylonian exile, Paras Madai. But let's just read it at face value and I'll explain after. Achashverosh said the following. Belshazzar chishev v'ta'a. Belshazzar, who was the last of the Babylonian kings, he made a calculation and he made a mistake. Ana chashivna velo ta'ina. I will calculate and I'm not going to make a mistake. Now I want to speak out what we're about to see before we see it inside, and I think it'll make the sugya a lot clearer. The Jews were taken into Galut. We know in general who destroyed the Beit HaMikdash and who brought the Jews into Galut. That was Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the first king of Bavel. Now, there were two other kings of Bavel that followed him. The one after him was his son, which was Avil Merodech, and then the one after that was Belshazzar. Belshazzar, as we're going to see momentarily, made a calculation, because he also knew this nevuah. He knew that there was supposed to be 70 years. Actually, if you have the art scroll there, it has the chart at the bottom. It's a nice chart.
Oh, yeah.
So it has the three kings of Bavel was Nebuchadnezzar, Avil Merodech, and then Belshazzar. Belshazzar made a calculation of 70 years. The Jews weren't redeemed, and he made a party with the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. That night he was killed, because he was mezalzel and Hashem in the kelim. He was killed by the first of the kings of the Paras Madai empires. This is also important information. Paras Madai are two different countries, Persian and Mede, two different empires. They made a pact between each other. They made a shutfut, a partnership. And as we'll learn more about this later, they ruled as kings in tandem, together. We're going to learn more about this later. So that became known as the Paras Madai Empire, Persian Mede Empire. The first of those kings was Daryavesh, the Hamadi, the Mede Daryavesh, who was Daryavesh Harishon, because there was a second one, which was the son of Esther. We'll get to that soon. So you had Daryavesh, which was the first king who killed Belshazzar and took the seat of power from Babylonia, from Bavel to Paras Madai. Then you had Koresh, who followed him, Daryavesh Koresh. Then you had Achashverosh, and finally you had his son, Achashverosh's son, whose name was also Daryavesh. We call him Daryavesh Hasheni, or Daryavesh the Persian. The first one was Daryavesh the Madai, the Mede. The second one was Daryavesh the Persian. But this is an empire. We look at it as one Malchut. Fine. Okay, good. Now, where were the Jews all of this time? So in the beginning, the Jews were under Babylonian control. When Belshazzar was killed and Daryavesh took over, which signified the beginning of the Malchut of Paras Madai, so then they became under the power of Paras Madai, which is what led to the Purim story. But now that we're under their power and Haman has power in that Malchut, that led to the whole Purim story. So the Jews were shifted in exile. Just want to point that out. We call it Galut Bavel, but actually there were two sections of this exile. Okay, good. Now, I'm just going to speak this out and then we'll see it inside. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, there were actually three crucial periods in regards to the destruction. Three periods, okay? The first year of Nebuchadnezzar's power, he conquered Assyria, conquered Ashur. This has nothing to do with the Jewish people. That's the first year. Year one, we'll call it. Year one, he conquered Ashur. Year two, he conquered Yerushalayim, and its current king, whose name was Yehoiakim. There's a lot of names here. I'll just try to keep it very simple. So the second year of his power, when he was ruling as the king, Nebuchadnezzar, he conquered Yehoiakim. A chart would actually help a lot with this, but I don't think it gives you a chart. I should have a board. He conquered Yehoiakim, who was the king of Yehuda at the time. Okay. Eventually, he killed Yehoiakim, if I remember correctly, and he put Yehoiakim's son as the king in Yerushalayim. Now really, he didn't have much power at that point. He was ruling, controlled by Bavel, but Yehoiachin, it's confusing. The first one is Yehoiakim. He was conquered in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar put Yehoiachin as the king over Yehuda, and he left them there. Okay. Now fast forward 7 more years. 7 years later, which is now the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's rule, the 8th year, he exiles Yehoiachin, and it's considered the first wave of exile. He took all the Talmidei Chachamim with them. They took a large portion of the significant people of Yerushalayim and exiled them to Bavel. That's Galut Yehoiachin, it's called. First wave of exile from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. 11 years after that is what we call Chorvot Yerushalayim, the destruction of Yerushalayim, and that's the second wave of exile, which was called Galut Tzidkiyahu, because Tzidkiyahu was appointed the king after Yehoiachin. So Nebuchadnezzar took the second wave and the remaining Jews essentially to Bavel. So we have 2 waves of exile. The first occurred in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, which is Galut Yehoiachin, and the second was 11 years after that in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar's Malchut, which was like the total destruction of Yerushalayim, of Eretz Yisrael for the Jews as they knew it. 2 waves of exile. So now we could already start to understand when Yirmiyahu Hanavi says it's 70 years leBavel, it's not so clear, was it, let me give you 3 options essentially. Was it 70 years from Nebuchadnezzar's power when he became king? Was it 70 years from the first wave of exile? Was it 70 years from Chorvot Yerushalayim, the second wave of exile? We can already see why this wouldn't be so simple to figure out. So what Achashverosh did was like this. He said Belshazzar made a calculation. He made a mistake. I'm not going to make the same 70-year mistake starting from the wrong time point. That's what Achashverosh understood.
This is the difference between Belshazzar to Achashverosh, 19 years?
Well, that's what we're going to have to figure out. But Achashverosh knew what Belshazzar had done, and he knew that he thought he had made a mistake that he would do better. He also made a mistake, and that's why ultimately things didn't work out as he thought. So let's see this inside now. Says the Gemara, that's just I wish I had a spreadsheet here. It would actually make it a lot easier. But anyways, let's see. So the Gemara says like this. Why was Achashverosh comfortable in the 3rd year of his reign to make the party with the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash? This is like this. Mahi, what is this talking about? Tichtiv. Pasuk in Yirmiyah tells us. He predicts the redemption. He says, Ki lefim le'ot lebavel shiv'im shana efkod etchem. When there are 70 years of Bavel, I will redeem you. Now, of Bavel, or the fullness of Bavel, is a completeness of Bavel. It's a vague way of saying 70 years from something associated with Bavel, but it's not clear of what. Again, it could be the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's rule, it could be the first wave of exile, or it could be the second wave of exile. Bichtiv, and we also have a pasuk in Daniel that says, L'mal'ot l'chorvot Yerushalayim shiv'im shana. It says it was the completion of the destruction of Yerushalayim 70 years. So 70 years from Bavel, 70 years from Chorvot Yerushalayim. 2 different predictions, one by Yirmiyah, one by Daniel. So Achashverosh said the following. Chashuv, Belshazzar made the following calculation. Again, Belshazzar was the last of the Babylonian kings. He made the following calculation. Arba'in v'chamesh de Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years. Okay, his reign was for 45 years. Ve'esrim mitlat de Evil Merodach. Evil Merodach was the second of the Babylonian kings, the son of Nebuchadnezzar. He ruled for 23 years. V'tarti didei. And Belshazzar said, I've already ruled for 2 years. So 45 plus 23 is 68. Plus 2 is 70. So Belshazzar said in the beginning of his 3rd year, he said, well, clearly the Jews have not been redeemed. It's 70 years since Nebuchadnezzar became king, and that's how he understood should be. He made a party, used the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. Ha-shivim, and that's 70 years. Apik ma'ani de Beit Mikdashay, he took out the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, vishtamish behu, and he used them. And what ended up happening is that night he was killed by Daryavesh, the first of the Melachim of Paras Madai Empire. How was Belshazzar calculating? From the beginning of Malchut Bavel. Everybody hear that? The beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's career, which is Malchut Bavel. So this is all, Achashverosh knew Belshazzar's calculation, and he assumed that was his mistake. So the Gemara wants to tell us, how do we know Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years, Belshazzar, Evil Merodach was 23. So the Gemara says, Nebuchadnezzar minal d'arbain v'chamesh shnin malach. How do we know Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years? The Amar Mar, as the Braita teaches us, it says like this: Galut b'sheva, Galut b'shmona. This is actually based on psukim. The Braita says the exile was in the 7th year, the exile was in the 8th year. Galut b'shmona esre, Galut b'tsha'esre. And also there was an exile in the 18th year, there was an exile in the 19th year. Now we're not talking about 4 different exiles, we're talking about 2 exiles. So 7 and 8 is 1 exile, 18 and 19 is 1 exile. There are 2 exiles. Why is it 7 and 8 and 18 and 19? Because if you calculate from the Malchut of Nebuchadnezzar, so then it's going to be the 8th year when the first wave of exile occurred. If you calculate from when he conquered Yerushalayim, he conquered Yehoiakim, so that was the 2nd year of his Malchut, which is going to be the 7th.
The 9th.
The 7th. 7 and 8. The first wave of exile is called 7 and 8 because the first wave of exile occurred 8 years after his Malchut, which was 7 years after he conquered Yehoiakim, the first king that we're talking about, of Yerushalayim, because he conquered Yehoiakim in the second year of his career. 18 and 19 refers to the second wave of exile, which was 11 years after. Again, if you calculate from the beginning of his career, it's the 19th year. If you calculate from when he conquered Yerushalayim, it's the 18th year. Okay, clear, that's what we just mentioned. Galut b'shmona, then the Gemara explains. Galut b'sheva lekivush Yehoiakim. The first wave of exile, which we call Galut Yehoiachin, occurred 7 years from when he conquered Yehoiakim, which was Galut Yehoiachin. That was the first wave of exile called Galut Yehoiachin. Shmona leNebuchadnezzar, which was the 8th year of Malchut of Bavel, the Malchut of Nebuchadnezzar. Galut b'shmona lekivush Yehoiakim, and the second wave of exile, which is called Galut Tzidkiyahu, was 11 years after, which is 18 years after Nebuchadnezzar conquered Galut Yehoiachin, conquered Yehoiakim, he conquered Yerushalayim, which is Galut Tzidkiyahu, Sheitcha Yisrael Nebuchadnezzar, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar. The Amar Mar, as the Braita explains, like I told you, Shana Rishona, the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's career, Kivesh Ninveh, he conquered the city of Ninveh. Ninveh was the capital of Ashur. So the first year of Bavel, of Nebuchadnezzar's career, he conquered Ninveh, which was conquering Ashur. Shnia, in his second year, Kivesh Yehoiakim, he conquered the king of Yerushalayim at the time, whose name was Yehoiakim. B'chtiv, and Yirmiyah tells us, Vayehi b'shloshim. Now what happened was after that, let me just speak this out. Eventually Yehoiakim was killed and Yehoiachin was put in his position. 7 years after he conquered Yerushalayim, which was the 8th year of his career, he exiled the first wave of exile, including the king Yehoiachin, to Bavel. He threw Yehoiachin, the second king we mentioned, in jail. He was thrown into jail. And the pasuk tells us, V'chtiv in Yirmiyah, it says, Vayebesh 37 shana legalut Yehoiachin. 37 years after Yehoiachin was exiled and thrown in jail, Melech Yehuda, the king of Yehuda, B'shnei masar chodesh, in the 12th month, Be'esrim v'chamisha lachodesh, the 25th of the month, Nasa Evil Merodach Melech Bavel. Evil Merodach was the new king. Achashverosh, Nebuchadnezzar had died, and Evil Merodach inherited the position. Evil Merodach, the king of Bavel, Bishnat Malchuto, in the first year of his career, at Rosh Yehoiachin Melech Yehuda. He took Yehoiachin out of jail. Vayotzeo Tomi Beit HaKela, he removed him from jail. Period. Now, what do we see from this pasuk? We know that Yehoiachin was exiled 8 years into Nebuchadnezzar's career. He was in jail for 37 years, which is the year that Nebuchadnezzar died. So 8 plus 37 is 45. So therefore, what the Gemara says is, you see, Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years. Tamni, so the 8 years that was until the point that Nebuchadnezzar had this Yehoiachin thrown in jail, Vitzlatin v'sheva, and 37 more years that he was in jail till Nebuchadnezzar died, and his son Avil Merodach took Yehoiachin out of jail. Harei arba'in v'chamesh to Nebuchadnezzar. So this gives us a sum total. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years. So far we got that clear. Ve'esrin betlat de Avil Merodach Gemara. Now, the fact that Avil Merodach, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, ruled for 23 years, that's Gemara, that's a tradition. Okay, we don't have a source in the Psukim for that, but that's a tradition. So said Belshazzar, that's 68. 45 plus Nebuchadnezzar, 23 of Avil Merodach, that's 68 years. Vitarti dide, and Belshazzar finished off and said, 2 years of my career, this was his 3rd year, Hashivin, this is 70 years. Amar, so he said, Ashtevade tulo mifriki, the Jews are no longer going to be redeemed. Apik mani debe mikdasha, he took out the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, ve'ishtamish behu, and he used them. And then, Hainu de Ka'amar le Daniel said to Belshazzar, Ve'almari shemayi tromamta, Olama'ane de Beitei taiv kadamach. You rebelled, you raised yourself against the Master of Heaven, against Hashem, and you had the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash brought in front of you. He told Belshazzar, you did the wrong thing, and now you're going to suffer the consequences, because you calculated wrong. Meaning, regardless, to use the kelim is wrong. But the reason he used them is because he thought 70 years was up, and the Jews were not going to be redeemed, and therefore, he might as well do as he sees fit. And that's what the pasuk says there in Daniel. Ve'belelia, that night that he had made this party, Katil Belshazzar Malka Kazdai, the Babylonian king Belshazzar was killed. And it says by Daryavish, and it says V'Daryavish Mada'a Kabil Malchuta Kebarshnin Shitin V'Tartin. When he was 62 years old, he became Daryavish the Mede became the king over the new Malchuta Paras Madai. So far what we have is like this. Chashverosh saw that Belshazzar's calculation had been 70 years from the beginning of the career of Bavel, of Nebuchadnezzar. And he said, I know he made a mistake, well, because he was killed by using the Kelim of the Beit HaMikdash, and obviously the Jews have not yet been redeemed. So Chashverosh said, I'm not going to make the same mistake that he made. Now, what did Achashverosh say we should rather calculate 70 years from? So Belshazzar calculated from the beginning of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. He figured it's from the first wave of exile, which was how many years later?
8 years.
8 more years. So let's add 8 more years. So that should mean then that the Jews should be redeemed 8 years later. So let's see. Amar Achashverosh said, he made a mistake. I'm not going to make the same mistake. Because it's unbelievable. He was darshaning the psukim. He was learning the psukim. Michtiv lemalchut Bavel doesn't say to the reign of Bavel in Yirmiyah. What does it say? LeBavel chtiv. It says the power of Bavel, meaning the power of Bavel over the Jewish people. So that means, when did they exile, the first wave of exile? Ma'ile Bavel, legalut Bavel. So Achashverosh said, it means that it has to be 70 years after the first wave of exile. So how much would that be? Kama Batsiran, how many years were missing? Tamni, 8 more years. So let's add 8 more years. So Chashiv, he calculated the following. V'ayel chilufayu, he included instead 8 more years. Chada de Belshazzar. So there was the 3rd year of Belshazzar, so that's 1 more year. Now, the rest are going to be the Paras Madai kings. V'chamish de Daryavish v'Korish. Now the first Daryavish and Korish, those were the first 2 kings of Paras Madai. They ruled together a total of 5 years. So that's, or up to 6. V'tarti didei, and then you had Achashverosh, 2 more of his years, and that's why it says in the Megillah, Hashivin, that's 70. So Kivan dechazi de malu shivin, once he saw that those 70 had been filled from the first wave of exile, which was the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar, remember? Velo Ifrik, and the Jews were not redeemed. Amari said, Hashtavade tulo mifriki, the Jews are not going to be redeemed. Apikmani de Beit Mikdash v'ishtamish behu. He used the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash and he made the party. And that's why it says in the Megillah, his mind was comforted in the 3rd year of his career, because after 2 years of his reign, he calculated 1 year of Belshazzar, 5 years of Daryavish and Koresh, 2 years of mine, that's a total of 8. Calculating 70 years from the first wave of exile, the Jews haven't been redeemed, and therefore I can use the Kelim Beit HaMikdash. Now I would say, I don't know what was motivating him so much. Better to be safe than sorry. You saw the last guy who tried this. He didn't end well. So for Achashverosh also, that's what he wanted to do. I guess you see how beloved or how desirable the Jews, were. They wanted the Jews to be in their mamlacha, and also the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash really meant something to these people. Very interesting what you see from this. But either way, what happened?
Like they dokshem in the psukim, but they use in the Klan.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. You see, they held of the Navi to a certain degree.
They doing it
Yeah.
to disgrace, like, it's crazy.
Unbelievable.
He was almost a Talmid Chacham.
Almost, exactly. Give the shiurim. It's unbelievable. So what happened? He used the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. Bas Satan v'riked b'nei, and the Satan came and it danced between them. He started to create all kinds of fun. V'haraget Vashti, Vashti was killed. Meaning the Satan got involved and created problems there for him. Fine. So the Gemara says, I understand. V'hashapir chashiv, he made a good calculation. Meaning, if lebavel means from the first wave of exile, he made the right calculation. And we weren't redeemed that year, the 3rd year of his career. So why weren't we redeemed in that 3rd year? Oh, so everybody's already thinking this. Really, when should you calculate 70 years from? Meaning he was wrong also. When should we really calculate 7 years?
Reign of,
From the last one.
From the second wave of exile. How many years later was the second wave of exile? 11, which was the 19th year of his career. So that was his mistake. But this too is going to be a little bit difficult. So let's see. Sorry, Vashapir made a good calculation. There was no. He also made a mistake. Because in Daniel the pasuk says it's 70 years from the destruction of Yerushalayim, meaning from the second wave of exile. So the Gemara says, okay, let's calculate that. Sof in the end of the day, Kama Batziran, how many years should be missing? Chadsrei, 11, because there was 11 years between the first wave and the second wave of exile. So let's add 11 years. The problem is, we were not redeemed 11 years after this episode. And I'll tell you how we know that. Iyo Kama Malach, because how many years did Achashverosh rule? Our Besar. Achashverosh ruled for 14 years. The problem is from the 3rd year to the 14th year of his reign, that's 11 years. So we should have been redeemed in the last year of Achashverosh's career, but we weren't. We were only redeemed in the 2nd year of his son's career. That's when the Jews went back, Ezra, we went back and rebuilt the 2nd Beit HaMikdash. So there's 2 extra years that shouldn't have been there. That's already the 72nd year. So why were we only redeemed 2 years after the 70-year count ended from the 2nd wave of exile? That's the question the Gemara is asking. They should have built the Beit HaMikdash in the end of Achashverosh's career. We know in Ezra it says that the temple was still destroyed in Yerushalayim only until the 2nd year when of Daryavesh, who was the son of Achashverosh, gave them permission. So there's 2 extra years that are not accounted for in terms of the prophecy of Daniel. Even if you want to calculate from the 2nd wave of exile, 70 years after should be the end of Achashverosh's career, not the 2nd year of his son's career. This creates a problem. So the Gemara answers, as it always does, with a great chap. It says like this. Really what happened is like this. We were calculating that these were full years. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years, Avil Merodach 23, for example. But actually, some of these kings' years overlapped. Which means, I'll just give what the Gemara is going to say. We assume that Nebuchadnezzar and Avil Merodach ruled for 45 years and then 23 years. But the year that Nebuchadnezzar's career ended and Avil Merodach took over, overlapped, and that was actually 1 year. And similarly, let me just finish similarly, Daryavesh and Koresh, the first 2 kings of Paras Madai, it wasn't 5 years, 1 year overlapped, so it was 4 years. Which means there's 2 years unaccounted for. The 2nd year of Daryavesh Hasheni was actually the end of the 70 years from the 2nd wave of exile. That's the Gemara's answer. It's unbelievable. Let's read that inside. These years were chopped off years. They were partial years. So therefore, 2 years were unaccounted for, and that's how you get the 70 count from the 2nd wave of exile. Turn to Yud Amud Aleph, Tanya Nami Hachi, the Braita supports this. It says, V'od shana achat, the Girsas changed a little bit here. V'od shana achat, V'od shana achat leBavel, there was 1 more year of Bavel, V'amad Daryavesh v'hishlima. So Rashi explains what happened was like this. Really, based on Daryavesh's count, Belshazzar's count, there already would have been 70 years from the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's career. But as the Psukim tell us, actually, 70 years from the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's career would not have only been completed until Daryavesh took power. Once Daryavesh took power, so then with... Let me make sure I get this clear. Let me see if I get this right. He thought it was 70 years... sorry, 1 second. מיום שמלך נבוכדנצר 71 מיום שכיבש יקים. Shivim Shem Yom Shivim Asa Achat Al Yisrael. That's what they add in, right? So what are we saying here? Od Shana Achat LeBavel Limlod Shivim Shana Misheshalat Al Yisrael. Right, that's the key here. Based on, I think this is the pshat. Based on the calculation of Belshazzar, if we assume Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years, Avil Merodach ruled for 23 years, and then Belshazzar ruled for 3 years, based on that calculation. So then the third year, it would be 71, exactly. 71. And from the time that Nebuchadnezzar ruled over the Jews, it would have been 70. Would have been 70 already. Because it was the second year that Nebuchadnezzar conquered Yehoiakim of his career. But the Navi tells us it was only including the first year of Daryavesh that it was actually 70 years that the Goyim were ruling over us. So what the Gemara is saying is, why was it including that year? It's already 70 if you count 45 plus 23 plus the 3 years. So the Gemara says it must be that there was an overlap of a year between Nebuchadnezzar and Evil Merodach, which is unaccounted for, which is why it was only including the 1 year of Daryavesh that would make it a total of 70 years that the Goyim had Shlita over us. That's how the Gemara says. That's a raya. Amar Rava says, not only did the Goyim make a mistake in this calculation, Af Daniel ta'a b'hai chushbana. It's unbelievable. Even the Navi Daniel made a mistake in this calculation. Daniel. Because in Daniel, the Pasuk tells us, B'shnat achat lemalko, in the first year of the career of Daryavesh HaDamid. Now what happened was like this. Daniel himself was a little bit nervous because he said, look, it's been 70 years, as he calculated, from the beginning of Bavel, and we haven't been redeemed. And he said like this, B'shnat achat lemalko, ani Daniel binoti basfarim. I started to contemplate, to analyze the Sfarim, the calculations, the Sipurim, the counts, the Sipur, the count. I guess it's count. I started to analyze the count, and I got nervous. So then actually the story goes over there that the Malach came and told him, no, it's not 70 years from Malchut Bavel, it's 70 years from the second wave of exile. And that's when Daniel said, L'chorvot Yerushalayim. That's the idea there. So, Midika Amar Binoti, but the fact that he said, I started to contemplate, I started to think about it, that he also was confused, meaning he also made somewhat of a mistake. So the Gemara is saying is that the non-Jewish kings were not so stupid, meaning even the Nevi'im were a bit nervous or confused about this count. So he was told, no, it's L'charvot Yerushalayim. So Achashverosh wasn't necessarily so far off. All right, we'll stop here. The Gemara tomorrow, we'll stop at the top of Yud Bet Amud Aleph. The Gemara is going to say, but Tachlis, how do we understand? It's a stira in the Nevi'im. Because Yirmiyah said it's 70 years from Libavel, and Daniel's saying it's Charvot Yerushalayim. So ultimately, how do we understand that they're both true? Meaning it's true, Charvot Yerushalayim is what we're saying, Lamaskana. But what about Yirmiyahu? He said something too.
No?
Oh, but he said Libavel. Libavel sounds like either the beginning of the Bavel's career or something. So that's what we're going to have to figure out tomorrow. God willing.
When did Yirmiyah say?
Before the Korban.
Before.
Yeah, the Korban.
Okay.